The fluorescent lights of Dallas Love Field Airport buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Gate C-12. Barron Trump hunched his tall frame into an uncomfortable plastic chair, trying to make his 6'7" presence as invisible as possible. At 17, he'd mastered the art of blending in, or so he thought. His dark hoodie pulled low, his eyes fixed on his phone screen. He was just another teenager waiting for a flight. At least, that's what he hoped. He didn't see the gate agent approaching until a shadow fell across his screen. Looking up, he met the sharp features and narrowed eyes of a man whose badge read Senior Gate Agent. Something in that gaze made Barron's stomach tighten. "Excuse me, young man." The words cut through the terminal's white noise like static. "Are you certain you belong in the priority boarding section?" Barron's heart skipped, but his voice remained steady, a skill learned from years in the public eye. "Yes, sir. I have a first-class ticket." He held up his phone, the boarding pass clearly displayed. The agent's lips thinned to a line. "Wait here." Those two words would ignite a chain reaction that no one saw coming. Whispers rippled through the crowd as more airline staff gathered. Phones emerged from pockets like periscopes, their lenses trained on the unfolding drama. A woman with a toddler on her hip watched with growing concern. An elderly businessman lowered his newspaper, frowning at the scene. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket," the agent returned, flanked by a supervisor whose badge gleamed under the harsh airport lighting. "You'll need to step aside." "What issue?" Barron's voice cracked slightly, betraying his mounting frustration. "I booked this weeks ago." But what happened next would turn a routine flight into a social media firestorm. As security officers approached, their presence drawing more attention than their discretion intended, no one realized that across town a mother's phone was already buzzing with notifications. Melania Trump's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her phone as she watched the first viral video of her son being led away from Gate C-12. The caption read, "Watch what happens when Barron Trump tries to board a flight at Dallas Love Field." The view count was climbing by the thousands. "Turn around," she commanded her driver, her accent thickening with barely contained fury. "To the airport. Now." Back at Gate C-12, Barron followed the security officers, his head held high despite the whispers and camera phones following his every move. He'd faced public scrutiny before, but something about this felt different. More personal. More dangerous. He was right. This wasn't just about a boarding pass anymore. This was about to become a moment that would shake the internet and challenge America's conscience. The small interrogation room felt like a cage. Barron sat alone, his reflection fractured in the one-way glass. The room was meant to intimidate, but all he felt was a familiar weariness. He'd been here before, not in this exact room, but in countless moments where his name became both a target and a burden. His mind drifted to breakfast that morning, his mother's voice soft but firm across their Manhattan kitchen table. "Remember," Melania had said, stirring her coffee with practiced elegance, "you travel alone today, but you're never really alone." He'd nodded, not fully grasping the weight of those words until now. Outside the interrogation room, the airport buzzed with activity. Passengers hurried past, their wheeled luggage creating a constant rhythm against the polished floors. But near Gate C-12, a crowd lingered. Phones remained raised, recording devices ready. The incident had already begun spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. "Did you see what they did to that Trump kid? He was just sitting there, minding his own business. Maybe there's more to the story. Someone needs to do something." The whispers and posts multiplied, each carrying a piece of the unfolding drama. Security footage would later show what the viral videos missed. Barron's quiet compliance, his polite responses, his dignified restraint even as the situation spiraled beyond reason. Meanwhile, in her SUV racing through Dallas traffic, Melania Trump's mind raced faster than the vehicle. She'd planned this trip meticulously, intending to surprise Barron at his destination. Now, her maternal instincts screamed at her to reach him, to protect him, to fight the battle he shouldn't have to fight alone. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News outlets were picking up the story. Twitter threads grew longer by the second, but one message stood out, a direct text from a friend. They're treating him like a criminal, all because of his last name. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, she'd taught Barron to handle public scrutiny with grace. Stay calm, she'd always said. Let them underestimate you. Your dignity is your strength. Now, watching the viral videos of her son being led away by security, those lessons felt hollow against the raw injustice of the moment. Back in the interrogation room, Barron stared at his hands, remembering another piece of his mother's advice. In moments of pressure, remember who you are, not just what they think you are. He straightened his shoulders, his height making the small chair seem almost comical. The door opened. A different security officer entered, younger this time, looking somewhat uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Trump, we're just trying to verify some information." He paused, shuffling papers unnecessarily. "It's standard procedure." "Is it?" Barron's voice was quiet but clear. "Is it standard procedure to detain passengers with valid tickets, or just ones with certain last names?" The officer had no answer for that. Outside, social media exploded with commentary. Videos of the initial confrontation racked up millions of views. Hashtags began trending. #FreeBarron, #Dallas Airport Shame, #LetHimFly. The story transformed from a simple airport incident into a mirror reflecting deeper societal biases. What none of the trending posts captured was the weight of the moment, the years of careful navigation through public spaces, the constant awareness of being watched, the delicate balance between standing out and blending in. For Barron, this wasn't just another viral moment. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent under society's microscope. Melania's SUV weaved through traffic with increasing urgency. Each passing minute felt like an eternity. Her phone showed another video, this one from a different angle, capturing the moment security approached her son. His height made him stand out, but it was his composure that struck her. Even now, he carried himself with the dignity she'd worked so hard to instill. The airport terminal had become a stage, and what happened next would depend on whose version of justice would prevail: the cold efficiency of protocol or the fierce protection of a mother who'd had enough. The fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly in the interrogation room as another security officer entered, this one carrying a tablet. His eyes widened slightly when they landed on Barron, perhaps finally registering that the suspicious passenger was just a teenager trying to catch a flight. "Mr. Trump," the officer began, his tone notably softer than his colleagues, "can you explain why you're traveling today?" Barron fought the urge to sigh. "I have a first-class ticket, all my documentation, and no obligation to explain my personal travel plans." His voice remained steady, but something in his chest tightened. "What I'd like to understand is why I'm being detained." Outside the room, the situation was taking on a life of its own. Passengers who'd witnessed the initial confrontation began sharing their accounts online, each post adding fuel to the viral fire. "Just watched security haul away #Barron Trump at Dallas Airport. Kid was just sitting there, looking at his phone. This is wrong. At Dallas Love Field, what kind of profile are you using? Height? Last name? This is embarrassing. Watching this tall kid being treated like a threat, he's literally just trying to fly somewhere. #Airport Drama." The posts multiplied, each carrying a piece of the story across the digital landscape. But what the viral videos couldn't capture was the weight of the moment, the years of careful navigation through public spaces, the constant awareness of being watched, the delicate balance between standing out and blending in. If you're following this story so far, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these powerful real-life stories. Now, let's see what happened next. Melania's SUV was now minutes away from the airport. Her phone had become a window into her son's ordeal, each new video and post making her blood boil. A new clip appeared, this one showing the initial confrontation from a different angle. The gate agent's body language, the gathering crowd. her son's quiet dignity in the face of obvious prejudice. She clicked on one of the trending hashtags. #LetBarron The comments ranged from outrage to support. Remember when flying while famous meant first-class treatment? Now it means interrogation. This kid has dealt with more public scrutiny than most adults. Give him a break. At Melania Trump, your son is handling this with incredible grace. Back in the interrogation room, Barron's patience was wearing thin. Another officer had joined the group, this one carrying what appeared to be printouts of his travel history. Your previous flights show a pattern of, the officer began. A pattern of normal travel, Barron interrupted, his voice finally showing a hint of frustration. Like any other passenger with the means to fly first class. Are we done with this theater? The officers exchanged glances. The situation was escalating beyond their control, but protocol, or what they claimed was protocol, demanded they continue this charade. Meanwhile, at the gate, the crowd had grown. What started as curious onlookers had evolved into concerned citizens. A businessman in an expensive suit approached the gate agent who'd initiated the incident. "I fly through here every week," he said, his voice carrying across the terminal. "Never once been questioned about my first-class ticket. What makes this kid different?" The gate agent stammered something about security protocols, but his words fell flat against the rising tide of public opinion. A mother with 2 teenagers spoke up next. "My kids fly alone all the time. Never been pulled aside like this. Never been interrogated. This isn't right." The crowd murmured in agreement. Phones continued recording, documenting every moment of this increasingly tense situation. In the corridor leading to the interrogation room, a young airline employee rushed toward her supervisor, tablet in hand. "Sir, you need to see this. The story's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're trending, and not in a good way." The supervisor's face paled as he scrolled through the feeds. What had started as a routine security check had morphed into a PR nightmare. And now, according to one tweet, Melania Trump was on her way. Airport security cameras caught her arrival. A composed but determined figure striding through the terminal, her presence causing heads to turn and whispers to spread. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown. But she wasn't heading to the interrogation room. Not yet. First, she had something to say to the gate agent who'd started this whole spectacle. "Where?" she asked, her accent thickening with controlled fury. "Is the person who decided my son didn't belong in first class?" The gate agent who'd instigated the whole incident suddenly found himself face to face with Melania Trump. The terminal fell silent. Phones raised to capture what happened next. Her presence commanded attention without effort. The perfect posture, the steel in her eyes, the barely contained fury of a mother whose child had been wronged. "Ma'am," the agent began, his earlier confidence evaporating. "This is a security matter." "A security matter?" Melania's voice carried across the terminal. "Show me. Show me right now what security threat my 17-year-old son poses to this airport." The supervisor materialized beside the agent, sensing impending disaster. "Mrs. Trump, if we could discuss this privately—" "No," she cut him off, her accent growing thicker with emotion. "You made this public when you decided to humiliate my son in front of everyone. We will discuss it right here." Phones kept recording. The crowd grew larger. Social media exploded with live updates. Breaking: Melania Trump confronts Dallas airport staff over Barron's detention. Watch live, Mother Bear mode, activated at gate C12. This is getting intense. Airport staff looking nervous. Barron Gate. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, Barron sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The officers' phones were buzzing constantly now. One of them glanced at his screen and muttered something under his breath. "Is something wrong?" Barron asked, allowing a hint of sarcasm to color his words. "Besides the obvious." Back at the gate, Melania wasn't finished. She turned to address the growing crowd, her voice clear and measured. Look at what happened here today. My son, who has flown hundreds of times, who has held himself with dignity despite constant public scrutiny, was singled out, questioned, and detained. Not because of any legitimate security concern, but because someone decided he didn't look like he belonged in first class. The gate agent attempted to interject. "Ma'am, our protocols—" "Your protocols?" Melania's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Show me where your protocols say to harass a minor who has a valid ticket and proper identification. Show me." A woman in the crowd called out. "They didn't even check his ID before calling security." The supervisor's face reddened. "Mrs. Trump, there seems to have been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Melania interrupted. "I want to see the security footage, all of it, from the moment my son sat down at this gate, and I want to see it now." The crowd murmured in approval. More phones appeared, more cameras recorded. The story was trending nationally now. #Dallas Airport becomes battleground for privilege versus prejudice. Melania Trump transforms from former First Lady to Mama Bear in seconds. Watch, the moment airport staff realized they messed with the wrong teenager. Inside the terminal's security office, officials scrambled to contain the situation. Phones rang incessantly. Email notifications pinged like warfare. The airport's social media team watched in horror as their mentions exploded. At Dallas Love Field, explain why you're profiling teenagers, how many other passengers get interrogated for looking out of place in first class, waiting for the PR damage control to begin, #Barrongate. The security footage appeared on monitors throughout the terminal. A timeline of prejudice laid bare. There was Barron, sitting quietly, head down, trying to blend in despite his height, the gate agent's aggressive approach, the escalation that followed. Melania watched, her jaw tightening with each frame. "Now," she said, her voice deadly calm, "explain to me how this represents your airport's values." The silence that followed was deafening. A young airline employee, barely older than Barron, stepped forward. "Mrs. Trump, they're bringing your son from the security office now." The crowd parted as Barron emerged, escorted by security officers who now looked like they wished they could disappear. At 6'7", he towered over everyone, yet managed to carry himself with a quiet grace that made the earlier treatment seem even more absurd. Melania's expression softened for a moment as she saw her son, then hardened again as she turned back to the staff. "Here's what happens next," she announced, her voice carrying authority that made everyone straighten their spines. "First, you will issue a public apology, not just to my son, but to every passenger who has ever been profiled at your gates. Second, you will review and revise your so-called protocols that allow this kind of discrimination. And third," she paused, making eye contact with each staff member involved, "you will remember this day the next time you decide to judge someone based on appearances." Social media erupted with support. This isn't just about Barron Trump anymore. This is about every kid who's ever been made to feel they don't belong. Watching this mother defend her son is powerful. No PR team, no politics, just pure Mama Bear energy. The look on the gate agent's face when he realized who was coming for him, priceless. The supervisor, now sweating visibly, stepped forward with a prepared statement. "On behalf of the airport and airline, we sincerely apologize for—" "Stop!" Melania held up a hand. "Not to me, to him." She gestured to Barron. The supervisor turned to face Barron, who stood tall despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. The terminal fell silent again, hundreds of phones capturing the moment. "Mr. Trump," the supervisor began, his voice shaking slightly, "we sincerely apologize for our treatment of you today. It was inappropriate, unprofessional, and unfair. We failed in our duty to treat all passengers with respect and dignity, and for that, we are truly sorry." Barron nodded once, his response careful and measured. "I accept your apology. I hope this leads to changes that prevent anyone else from experiencing similar treatment." The maturity in his response made the earlier treatment seem even more shameful. The apology hung in the air, but its impact rippled far beyond Gate C12. As Barron and Melania were escorted to the airline's premium lounge, the incident transformed from a viral moment into something more profound, a catalyst for conversations about privilege, prejudice, and power. Inside the lounge, Melania's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Major news networks were picking up the story. Social media platforms exploded with commentary, but her attention remained focused solely on her son, who sat across from her, his long frame folded into a plush armchair. "You shouldn't have had to experience that," she said softly, her public persona melting into maternal concern. Barron managed a small smile. "It's not the first time, Mom. Probably won't be the last." "That's exactly the problem." Her accent thickened with emotion. "We accept too much, stay quiet too often, not anymore." Outside in the terminal, the story took on a life of its own. Passengers who'd witnessed the incident shared their perspectives with growing news crews. The young mother who'd spoken up earlier faced a forest of microphones. "It wasn't just about who he was," she explained, her toddler now asleep on her shoulder. "It was about watching someone in authority abuse their power. What kind of example does that set for our children?" The businessman who'd confronted the gate agent added his voice. "I've flown first class through this airport hundreds of times, never once questioned. But a teenager in a hoodie, suddenly it's a security issue? That's not protocol, that's profiling." Airport administrators huddled in crisis meetings as hashtags multiplied. #Barron Strong Dallas Airport Shame Stand Tall Barron #profiled in first class. Each tag carried stories from others who'd faced similar treatment. "Happened to my son last month. Wrong skin color for business class apparently. Been flying first class for years. Still get random checks every time. This is what privilege looks like, having to prove you belong in spaces others take for granted." In the airport's administrative offices, phones rang incessantly. The PR team drafted and redrafted statements while social media managers watched their mentions explode. But it was a rookie employee who finally said what everyone was thinking. "Maybe, instead of managing the story, we should be changing the system." The comment silenced the room. Meanwhile, airline executives scrambled to contain the damage. Emergency meetings were called, policy reviews were initiated, but the public had already rendered their verdict. At Dallas Love Field, your apology means nothing without action. Show us the policy changes. How many other passengers face this treatment when there aren't cameras rolling? This isn't just about one incident, it's about systemic bias in air travel. Back in the lounge, Barron scrolled through his phone, reading messages of support from friends and strangers alike. One caught his eye, a tweet from a fellow tall teenager. Watching Barron Trump handle that situation with such grace. Being tall and young doesn't make us suspicious. It just makes us tall and young. Stand Tall Barron. Melania noticed his small smile. "What are you thinking?" "Just..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe something good can come from this. Maybe someone else won't have to go through it because we didn't stay quiet." Outside, the gate agent who'd started it all sat in a back office, watching his career implode in real time. His supervisor had just finished explaining the terms of his administrative leave when a notification popped up on his computer. Mandatory sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff. The incident was becoming a teaching moment for the entire industry. Other airports began reviewing their own procedures. Airlines started examining their training protocols. The conversation expanded beyond one teenager in Dallas to a broader discussion about dignity in air travel. As evening approached, a new flight was arranged for Barron and Melania. But this time, something had changed. The same crowds that had gathered to record his humiliation now formed a protective barrier of sorts, their phones still raised but now capturing a different kind of moment. As Barron and Melania prepared to board their rescheduled flight, the airport had transformed. The same terminal that had witnessed his humiliation now buzzed with a different energy. People lined the walkway to their gate, phones raised not to record scandal, but to capture something more profound, a moment of collective redemption. The airport's director had arrived, impeccably dressed but visibly nervous. "Mrs. Trump," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed terminal. "Before you depart, I want to make a public commitment." Melania paused, her hand protectively near her son's elbow. The crowd pressed closer, sensing another viral moment in the making. "What happened today has exposed flaws in our system that go beyond one incident or one passenger," the director continued. "Effective immediately, we're launching a comprehensive review of our screening protocols with a focus on eliminating bias in passenger treatment." Social media erupted with real-time reactions. #Dallas Airport Director making real promises. Now let's watch for real changes. Actions. Apologies. This is how you handle a crisis. From profiling to policy change in one day. The power of standing up. #Barron effect. But it was what happened next that would be replayed millions of times across the internet. Barron, who had remained stoically quiet through most of the ordeal, stepped forward. At 6'7", he towered over the director, yet his voice carried a gentleness that made everyone lean in to listen. "Thank you," he said, his words measured and clear. "But this isn't just about me. It's about every passenger who's ever felt they had to prove they belonged. Maybe today can be the day that starts to change." The terminal erupted in applause. Phones captured the moment from every angle as tears welled in eyes across the crowd. Even hardened business travelers found themselves moved by the teenager's grace. Melania watched her son with fierce pride, her own eyes glistening. The boy who'd tried so hard to be invisible that morning had found his voice in the most unexpected way. The gate agent who'd started it all watched from the back office, witnessing through security feeds as his actions sparked a transformation he never intended. On his desk lay a new manual, Understanding and Eliminating Unconscious Bias in Air Travel. As mother and son finally walked toward their gate, something remarkable happened. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, but not before creating a natural barrier between them and the prying cameras of newly arrived news crews. It was an organic show of protection and respect, humanity reasserting itself in the age of viral outrage. A young airport employee, barely older than Barron, rushed up with boarding passes. "Mr. Trump, Mrs. Trump," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "we've upgraded you to our premium suite seats. It's not much, but—" "Thank you," Barron replied simply, giving her a small smile that would later become a widely shared GIF captioned, "This is what class looks like." The airline's CEO had just finished a press conference announcing system-wide changes in training and protocols. As he checked his phone, he saw the incident had sparked a nationwide conversation. Other airports were reaching out, eager to learn and adapt before similar incidents could occur. As their plane lifted into the Texas sky, Barron gazed out the window at the sprawling lights of Dallas below. His phone buzzed with one final notification. A tweet from the airport. "Today taught us that real change starts with acknowledging our biases. We're committed to doing better." #Stand Tall Barron. Melania watched her son's reflection in the darkened window, seeing not just the tall teenager who'd faced down prejudice with dignity, but also the quiet strength that had always defined him. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "You know," she said softly, her accent wrapping around the words like silk, "sometimes the hardest moments become the most important ones." Barron nodded, understanding flowing between mother and son without need for further explanation. His own tweet, composed just before takeoff, would later become the most shared message of the entire incident. "Thank you for all the support today. Remember, it's not about proving we belong. It's about showing others that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Stand tall, stay kind." #Choose Grace. The story would fade from headlines as all stories do, but its impact rippled outward in lasting ways. Dallas Love Field implemented comprehensive bias training. Other airports followed suit. Airlines revised their protocols. Small changes began adding up to significant shifts in how people were treated in public spaces. But perhaps the most profound change was the quietest one. In terminals across the country, gate agents and security personnel began pausing before making assumptions. Passengers started speaking up when they witnessed unfair treatment. Small acts of kindness multiplied, inspired by a teenager who chose dignity over anger. 1 month later, a young basketball player wearing a hoodie sat in first class at another airport. When a gate agent approached him, a nearby passenger stood up and said quietly, "Remember Dallas?" The agent paused, reconsidered, and walked away. The movement that started with #StandTallBarron had evolved into something larger, a reminder that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage, when someone decides that staying quiet is no longer an option. Back in New York, Barron kept the Dallas boarding pass as a reminder, not of the humiliation, but of the moment when standing up for himself meant standing up for others too. Because sometimes a simple flight becomes more than just a journey from one place to another. Sometimes it becomes a catalyst for change, a reminder that dignity isn't just a right. It's a choice we make, one moment at a time.